Good afternoon, everyone. It's now 2 o'clock and this hearing session is open. My name's Roshan Barrett. I'm a Chartered Town Planner. I've been appointed by the Secretary of State to carry out an independent examination of the Winchester District Local Plan 2020 to 2040. This hearing session and previous and subsequent ones are part of the examination process, which started with the submission of the plan in November of last year and will end with the submission of my report to the council. Jill Taylor, sitting to my left, is the programme officer. She's working independently of the council at my direction. She's responsible for all administrative arrangements for the examination. If you've got any queries about the running of the examination or hearing sessions, please have a word with her or email her. Her details are on the examination website. Please ensure that all phones and laptops, etc., are in silent mode. Toilet facilities are on the second floor. We're not expecting a fire alarm test this afternoon. If it does sound, follow the green signs to the meeting area. In the Wickham room, if there is anybody, follow the green signs again. Could I please ask people to avoid walking in this area just because there are trip hazards? Now, if you do have your laptop charging in a plug behind you, when we adjourn, if you don't mind unplugging them, pulling your lead in so that it isn't a trip hazard for those who are exiting the room. Guidance notes, hearing programme and agendas are all on the website. I will expect everybody to be familiar with those. The purpose of the examination is to decide whether the local plan has been prepared in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Compulsory Purchase Act 2004 as amended and associated regulations, and whether it meets the test of soundness set out in paragraph 35 of the National Planning Policy Framework. And those are positively prepared. That's providing a strategy which as a minimum seeks to meet the area's objectively assessed needs, justified, an appropriate strategy taking into account the reasonable alternatives based on proportionate evidence, effective, deliverable over the plan period and based on effective joint working on cross-boundary strategic matters, and consistent with national policy, enabling the delivery of sustainable development in accordance with the policies in the framework and other statements of national policy where relevant. Okay, so I've read all the representations and supporting material provided by all parties in the written statements prepared for the hearings. I will indicate what I need to hear about further. I've set out an agenda for the session. Now, we might take things out of order, but I'll indicate where that's likely. My starting point for the examination is the assumption that the council has submitted what it considers to be a legally compliant and sound plan. Those considering that a plan is not legally compliant or seeking to change the plan have to demonstrate to me why it's not sound, and what I would ask is for participants to refer to the 4 tests of soundness. Now, if I were to conclude that the plan is not legally compliant or sound, the council would not be able to adopt it in its current form. The council has already suggested some modifications to the plan in response to a combination of representations made during pre-submission consultation, my matters and issues, and what it suggested are editing corrections. Those are incorporated within SD 14, A, B and C. Now, I have asked for those to be amalgamated, and I've got a copy of a document SD 14. This morning, the council handed over a document that is an addition to that, and that includes a number of other main modifications. Now, the website has just gone down. The intention was to get this on the website so that everybody would have it for this afternoon's session. The website's down for some reason. So what we've done, you will have a copy of suggested main mods to policy D5, and that should be in front of you. If anyone doesn't have that, if they can speak to the programme officer, and we'll make sure that it's available. If there is any problem, I'll deal with D5 after a mid-afternoon adjournment, so you can address it with the programme officer at that time. Just to set out my approach to emission sites, I won't be dealing with them in detail at any hearing session. Rather, if it is the case that I find some site allocations to be unsound for any one of a range of reasons, in the first instance, I'll be turning to the council to suggest which sites they wish to bring forward, and those will be assessed in the usual way, and participants will have an opportunity to comment on that. Okay, is there anything else that we need to raise? Any housekeeping matters? Okay, let's move on then. So we're dealing this afternoon with the plan's approach to design. And that is set out in the chapter dealing with design, the first policy being D1. So now what this policy and the preamble to it does, it sets design at the very centre, at the heart of the plan. It sets out national policy and guidelines. It sets out the need for a contextual approach. And it says that it's not a standalone issue, that it runs through the plan, and it sets out how design can help deliver the plan aims. That's all in the supporting text and embedded within the policy. And in places where you set out national policy and guidance, you set out some Winchester specific issues, particularly when you're dealing with the characteristics of good design. And you set out the process for a design-led approach, don't you? The 6 stages that we don't need to go through, and the requirements of design, the approach and the required outcomes, don't you? That's all set out in the supporting text. Now, to get to the nub of it, and it's something that I raised early on, is the preamble is very long. In places, it's repetitive. In places, it's historic. And this actually is something that I've raised for a number of the policies. Could you just explain, you know, it's a very important issue for your plan, and we've said it runs through its very core. What is the justification for the preamble?
As you've recognised, you know, it's a key issue for the council.
Yeah.
We're looking to embed and implement the new national emphasis on design through this plan. I think in terms of our specific situation, it's fair to say that we've had a high quality places SPD with us for some time that brings in a lot.
Sorry, which SPD?
High quality places SPD has been in place for some time, which the council has found very useful. This plan's been brought forward all of that has been going on, yet there has been some slight difference of how, for instance, design codes are brought through the scope and nature of them, and therefore what you see in the plan is there have been some elements that have come through from that high quality places SPD to ensure that we retain them and that they follow through. When the SPD falls away on adoption of this plan, technically it won't be an SPD anymore, although it will still be a document that the council intends to make reference to. So that's really the background to why you see, frankly, quite a long preamble, quite a lot of supporting text. We think it's important, but we think in the context of that uncertainty, with how uncertainty on our side, with the scope and how we would bring forward design codes and that sort of thing, that we're in this position.
No, and I completely get that. I'm not here to improve the plan. I'm just here to apply the test of soundness. Now, I outline that there is some repetition, there's some historic stuff in there, there's some repetition of national policy and guidance. Does that go to the heart of soundness?
We don't think it does, no.
Okay. Any more? Or is that it? Have you?
Well, we have considered the questions and have reviewed it and don't see that there are glaring areas where a change to the plan is required. We understand the point and your wider point about the length of the plan and so on and so forth. But on balance, we think that it is in a reasonable place.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, were you going to say something?
Simply to echo what Mr. Ayling said, it's not a matter of soundness. It may be a matter of style, but it's certainly not a matter of soundness.
It's that cut off when it becomes a matter of soundness.
I don't think it doesn't get anywhere near that, it seems to me.
Okay, I hear what you say. Okay. So you introduced the contextual approach. That's in the supporting text, and then it's translated into the policy. Now, the use of these terms, are they consistently used? Are they clear? How does it relate to the plan's definition of the design process? And I'm just going to turn that up. Anyone from the council, please.
We think that the glossary in the plan towards the back of the document does set out a description. Turn to it too.
What page is that? Just struggling to get that. No, I've got it.
It's page 542.
Yeah, got it.
So, frankly, that is a précis of the design process that's set out on pages 75 and 76 of the document. I mean, you could. It's a shortening. It's a brief description of that process. Arguably, it could be expanded and spelled out to be exactly the same as you see the 6-stage process on pages 75 and 76. We think the shortened version in the glossary is a reasonable approximation of it, but obviously if it is considered to improve legibility and usability, then we're certainly not wedded to the definition in the glossary. It is just simply meant to be a shortened version of the process you see outlined on those pages.
Okay, and let's turn
Sorry, can I just add?
Oh, sorry, Mr. Fox.
Yep,
sorry.
Picking up on obviously Mr. Ayling said, this work that's informed this plan specifically came out of some workshops we did with Design Southeast. And it was a kind of light bulb moment really when basically it came very clear to us about the design process, which again is illustrated. It should be a circular process on page 59. An initiative process. Far too often at the moment, because the current local plan is silent on this issue, we get presented with plans and we're trying to actually understand as planners what led to that design. So what we're trying to do is put in very clear, hopefully graphical form on page 76, that basically each step should be justified, and you should better easily, when you are a planning officer in development management, see why you've reached that conclusion. And that at the moment is missing from the current local plan. Hence why we did the design workshops. Hence why we put quite a lot of effort into kind of explaining what we mean. Because at each stage you need to justify why you've made that decision and why you've come up with something. That makes it a lot easier for us as obviously development management colleagues to look at it, but also members of the public to actually understand what led to that design, rather than being presented with a fait accompli. Here we go, here's a standard house design, etc. So we do think it's really important. It has, as Mr. Alien said, one of the preamble takes a long time, but we do think it's such an important point that's missed at the moment that it's worth basically putting that extra effort in and showing how clearly that is, because it's central to the plan.
And that, you know, design-led approach, there are other plans that have focused on process, not just outcomes, aren't there? So, okay. And can I turn to the specific criteria? So what the policy says is it sets out the need to have a contextual approach, a design-led approach. So contextual approach in the first paragraph, because it says immediate and wider context, achieve good design, and then it goes on to set out what those requirements are, and where appropriate, what the outcomes should be. And it sets a number of those. So can I just, the first one, sorry, the second one deals with public realm. Then in the third one, we've got connected to green, blue infrastructure, public places, street patterns, etc. Then we've got public spaces. Sorry, 5, accompany landscape framework to enhance both the natural environment by maximising potential for local diversity. Then we've got parking, basically, in 12. Smart design and location of cycle parking, car parking, bus stop infrastructure. In this policy, to both support active travel whilst not negatively impacting on those with mobility issues. And then we've got in 13, designing buildings clearly identifiable and accessible entrances, blah, 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 waymarking and environmental and public realm improvements to aid navigation. So is there any repetition amongst those? Are they all clear in what they're trying to achieve?
I think they are, and I think it's basically comes back to what is missing at the moment from the applications that we're seeing is that they don't go through this step-by-step process, and that's why obviously this particular policy D1 has got quite a lot of criterion, but we do think they're essential because we do want people to actually document how they've addressed all of those issues. And if they do that, hopefully it's a very clear application. Hopefully it's very clear for the members of the public. So, for example, if I take the obviously the linking obviously with the public rights way, what we want to know is basically where is the nearest public rights way? Where is the bus stop? How do you get to it? Do you have to go down the dark alley at night? How do you access it? And it all sounds really straightforward in terms of thing, but unfortunately, we're just not getting that in applications. So this makes it a very clear and transparent process that you need to go through those criteria in detail and demonstrate how you've met them. So we don't think it's onerous. We think it's quite straightforward in terms of what you need to do. But unfortunately, at the moment, it's not happening.
So in terms of flexibility, whether it's onerous, is it going to add to cost? What do you say to that?
I think a lot of the criteria you've mentioned are covered, in other policies of the plan. They derive from work on transport, on and so on and so forth. This is not in addition to that. What this is about setting out through the design process and documented in the design access, the design access statement, how the proposal has evolved and how it justifies what is being applied for. So it's not additional work. It's about codifying and recording what has got us to this point in the process. So it should help if the design access can actually set this out. It should be able to provide a more convincing rationale for the decision maker to follow where a proposal's come from. So that's our motivation for specifying it and specifying these matters in the policy, that they are covered by other aspects. It's what we require to come in the DAS to support the proposal.
Okay, I've got it. So this is about demonstrating. It's about the audit trail, basically, as we call it, isn't it? Okay, I understand. Okay, could I open it up to those around the table, please? On the points that I've raised. Mr. Beveridge?
Chairman, it is not actually a point you've raised already. It's a new point that I wanted to make.
Okay.
Chairman, I'm really speaking on behalf of several architecture colleagues who can't be here today, who obviously take an interest in design. They've pointed out that there is this missing ingredient in design, which is the need to create a sociable community, which I take it to mean, from what I've understood, it's the sort of relationship of buildings to one another, how they relate to one another, and whether they create a feeling of togetherness. And the one point that I grasp fully from what they say is that the trouble with so many housing estates, even those that are being designed very recently, is that too much emphasis or primacy is given to the needs of car movements, and roads and car parking create a sense of alienation or prevent the creation of a sense of community. And therefore, it would be nice to see something about subordinating cars and their movement to active travel. I know active travel is mentioned in one of the sub-paragraphs, but it would be nice to see something about reducing the emphasis that is given to the ease of using cars. I'm told by those who work in the transport policy world that if you reduce the convenience of getting into your car, you're more likely to consider traveling by bus, foot, or bicycle. And there's one other good point that comes out of that. If you reduce the amount of land that is given over to the parking and use of cars, you can actually build to a much higher density. And I'm afraid the current development on Kings Barton, it's a very low density, between 30 and 40. And you should be able to double that, particularly if you reduce the primacy that you give to the car and the way it's integrated into estates. And I just would like to add one further point. I've noticed actually in the local plan, the draft we've got before us, is there very little reference to density. I can only find it in one policy, which is on the use of previous developed land. There's nothing about higher densities in this particular policy, and I think it should be included. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. No need to repeat what you've said, but there are various requests there for inclusion, sociable community places, address the dominance of the car, and refer to higher densities. Now, no need to go over what you've said. In terms of this is about demonstrating what your audit trail is. But any comments on that?
Just a couple of hooks for those specific points.
Yeah.
Mr. Fox may add, but on pages 73 and 74, the 10 characteristics of good design, and we try to set out what they are and then what we're expected to consider or achieve. And then the third column is the Winchester specific information. I'll just point to two of those on the third one down, which is, forgive me, the fourth one down on movement, where we're looking at delivering well-considered parking, servicing, and all the rest of it with some local needs around that. Because the policy requires the applicant to go through and consider that evidence, we would expect that to be considered through that process to the extent that we can then assess that and see if that's been delivered. And I'll make the similar point with the row at the top of the next page on public spaces, which is about public well-designed spaces that are safe and support social interaction, which was, I believe, the other main point that was sought. So by having those spelt out, but then what that means for Winchester, we hope that those issues are addressed. On the density point, I do accept the fact that we don't, for instance, have set densities. We don't require densities specifically in the policies of the plan. However, the capacity of sites has been assessed with densities appropriate to the location of the sites as set out in the SHELAR. But it's a judgment call on the part of the council that the policy on making best use of land just talks about appropriate densities in effect for the location. That's been a choice that's been made. Central Winchester is suitable for high density, but then it also has other constraints, including the historic environment. So it's just getting that back. I know you can manage things in a certain way, but nonetheless, that's one of the motivations for why the council has taken the line it has on density.
So which policy are you referring me to on that one?
If it's D6. Making best use of land is the phrase, apologies, but there's no density standards applied in policy through the plan.
Well, and expect higher densities where appropriate on sites which have good access to facilities and terms. Okay, yes, I understand. Mr. Fox.
Thank you. I think that just comes back to the heart of what this policy is trying to do in terms of design process. As appropriate means through the design process, you identify the most appropriate density for that site rather than being prescriptive. So that can apply to site densities, it can apply to car parking, which we'll come on to another hearing session. And like I say, the kind of making a kind of place kind of pleasant, amenable, whatever you want to kind of badge it, etc. Obviously comes down to the public realm, and that's dealt with in criteria 2, and obviously that bit about obviously trying to prioritise pedestrian routes, buses, cycling, that's in criteria 3 of the policy. So it's very much at the heart of what we're trying to do, is basically saying think about where things are located and demonstrate us through a documented trail what you're doing and why you've done it.
Okay. And in terms of, if you look at the characteristics of good design and you look at identity, respond to existing local character and identity, well-designed, high-quality, attractive places and buildings, would you anticipate that includes social cohesion?
I think very much so. I think that's all part of the jigsaw puzzle that you need to put together.
Okay. Okay. And you're suggesting some main modifications?
Yes, so these are...
Sorry, can I just turn those up?
Yes, sorry. Whilst you're looking, I can confirm the website's back up if it helps other participants.
Oh, thank you. And the document, I mean, you've got it in front of you, but the document is ED31. If you wish to turn that up, you can do so in the adjournment or whenever. Okay, so we're looking at main modification 12.
Yes, so this is amendments to supporting text paragraphs 538, which picks up on the presence of utility infrastructure to be considered as part of the design process. So helpful addition from the utility companies there. It should be in early in the design process. And another amendment is picking up on some suggested additional national guidance from Sport England and National Grid documents that in effect really they're examples of relevant national guidance, but actually both seem to have a particular relevance for development in Winchester, so they've been named and included in that paragraph supporting text 5.40.
And the Sport England Active Design Guidance and National Grid Document Design Guidelines for development near pylons and high voltage overhead power lines. Okay. And sorry, and that's because you think that they have particular relevance.
They were suggested to us by those authorities, but when you look at that, they are of relevance for us, you know, in terms of, we've certainly got experience here in Winchester of major developments where power lines have been an issue in master planning, such as West of Waterlooville, which helps demonstrate the value of considering that approach early in the design process. And similarly with Sporting's active design guidance, as we've outlined earlier, we're undertaking a playing pitch review already. You know, there is a reconsideration of the offer in the district, and ensuring that we pick up on that guidance was considered helpful.
Okay. Okay. Is there anything? Oh, sorry, Mr. Amond. Sport Winchester. Sorry, would you mind using your microphone? I have to say that's very important because it is being recorded to ensure that other people can hear as well. Yes.
So
please carry on.
the open spaces report, whether you believe, has identified quite a significant shortfall in sports and recreation facilities for not just the district. Our focus is mainly Winchester City. The clubs who we represent, we're an independent charity representing the voice of all the local clubs, of which most people in this room are probably members, you know, for every sport, are struggling with over demand and not enough supply of sports facilities. So in looking at the local plan, there is a complete absence, apart from some very lukewarm recommendations as to specifics around sporting infrastructure within the plan. You know, the housing plan looks great, all the things that you'll be talking about, but in terms of creating place and creating a great place to live, and the design standards around creating a great place, whether it be community or otherwise, people like to do stuff. They like to go out of their homes and play sport, formally or informally. So I think our view is we've made a recommendation in D1, I think is to say, can we just have something in the plan that says, look at national standards and look at, and potentially go beyond the bare minimum to look at how you can make great places. And sport is just well recognised. Sport England, all the independent evidence, we know that active people are healthier people for mental and physical health, and it just makes for great places. That includes cycle paths, all the full gamut. So our desire, or our kind of ask, if you will, would be, can we put something in there that incentivizes within the plan everybody to think about incorporating sport into design, because it's just absent currently. A lot of time focuses on movement, housing, developers, commercial development, effectively, and the cost to effectively the public purse, which, you know, we understand and we recognise. But sport can, as well as being a very cost-effective way of making places brilliant and better, they can also be a catalyst for making movement strategies better, getting people on bikes, getting people walking. And I suppose our ask, particularly in policy D1, is, can we just include something within that is a specific, take into account sport when you're doing design, without making a completely separate point. One of the challenges with planning is you're looking at individual developments, development by development, area by area. And because there is a lack of overarching vision, specifically for a city, because that's where we recommend, is you're looking at things piecemeal. So when it comes specifically to infrastructure investment, you end up looking at particular developments, 1,000 houses here or 1,000 there, that throws up SIL money or investment. And they tend to be looked at in parcels because there isn't an overarching strategy for sport, activity, etc., that you can then start moving monies, energy, effort. So the kinds of things where you look at any successful city or any successful area, you look at sport zones. So the work that the council is already doing with the playing pitch strategy and looking at doing analysis, talking to the clubs about what's needed, creating zones of sport across the city is the way to enable sport to be a catalyst for high class design and development, and that is completely absent from the local plan. So we're not trying to say these sports specifically need these facilities, but it needs to be incorporated. If it was incorporated into the design thinking and the process, it would be a tangibly better local plan, and it would end up with tangibly better outcomes. So I guess that's our ask is not to say we want 3 swimming pools or an extra this, that, and the other. Our ask is can we incorporate some of the national standards into the plan specifically, so that when you get down the line in terms of delivery, they're not just falling off. They're not just nice to haves, or they're not just things that fall off the planning process because they're just ignored. And if it's embedded in the local plan, then they have to happen.
Okay, could I ask the council to respond to that in the context of D1? Some of it clearly is not appropriate for D1, but it is that the requirement for a design-led approach that incorporates the need for sport. Is that in there? Can you point me?
We think that in as far as D1 goes, in terms of its process, when you look back to the 10 characteristics of good design, there's 4 of those that we think directly relate to the sort of issues that Mr. Abraham has outlined in terms of give me, I'm just getting them in the right order. So the 4th row down, movement, in terms of active travel and ability to move around the city. Nature, in terms of its network of open spaces, including play and other uses. And then over the page into public spaces, and in terms of high quality and attractive public spaces, and then uses in terms of socially inclusive uses. And we think that actually between them, they do provide the grounds for considering the potential for sport to play a part in that work and the good uses. I know you've asked me to relate to that policy, and I think in as far as that policy, that's as far as we go. But I must mention that there are sports pitches standards and other measures in other parts of the plan. But on D1, we think we've got enough here to address the issue.
Okay, I hear what you say. So the first column is just repeating the characteristics of good design, isn't it? Sorry,
yes.
I'm just understanding that. So the first one is the characteristics. Second is what to consider and achieve, and that's straight from national guidance, isn't it?
Yes.
So the existing local evidence that you referred to, and there isn't anything there that refers to sport, is there? There
isn't. We're in the middle of a review of the playing pitch strategy. I think if it was finalised, we could have included it here and might have been useful. On balance, we decided not to mention the old one because it will shortly become superseded. But I would hope and expect that the issues being raised in the 10 characteristics would be sufficient anyway for sport to be considered under those 4 criteria I've mentioned.
Okay, I've understood the point. Okay.
Can I come back on that just
pretty
briefly? I think there's so you mentioned specifically open spaces. There's a big difference between informal open spaces that have a role to play and built environment, proper facilities. So I'll just make that clarification point. They're all relevant and they're all part of recreation and sport and leisure, but you do need something more than just a running track in a park. But parks are really important. I'm not undermining that at all, but it has to be both. One comes with a bigger price tag than the other, and generally throughout a planning process or a delivery process, the things that cost money tend to fall away and not happen often. So it's making sure you don't lose that in a process where you're busy chipping away at things because money and profit becomes the overriding decision making as opposed to health and well-being and community. I'll just make that point. And I think often the other observation, which is not meant as a criticism at all, because the playing pitch strategy is a really good thing. And I think Winchester City Council are trying really hard to make a difference in listening. However, often the outcomes of that tends to be looking at lowest common denominator. So you tend to view something. I know specifically the clubs are giving lots of information into that process. What tends to come out is the least you can get away with as opposed to the best. And that a design thinking process can often hide high quality, because you can still go through a process and get to the end point, which is applied a process, a design thinking process, but the outcome is of a low standard, but you still run through the process. If you apply some higher quality thresholds or involve different audiences in that design evaluation design process, you often end up with better outcomes. So I think that it feels to me there is a lack of quality standard within the plan for maybe not for some other areas like housing, but certainly for public infrastructure, of which sport and recreation plays a part. Just because they don't necessarily exist, they're not easy often to quantify. But I think there's a big opportunity within the plan to start defining what that might look like and going out to talk to people about it. I'm not saying the plan is, if the plan had it in it and there was more focus around it, you would get better answers at the end of the process. It's not to say that the process is flawed. It's just often you end up with aiming low rather than high.
Okay, do your criteria, you've said here, you've said what your development proposals need to demonstrate. Does that?
We think it goes as far as it can really in this policy. It's asking for the potential for developments to consider, in this case, those four aspects: spaces, uses, data and movement. I appreciate the fact that it's considered that perhaps the council should aim higher, but we would always be looking to evidence and quantify that. I understand concerns about the limitation of the playing pitch strategy, but that is our vehicle for really actually understanding what we can justify in these discussions, in this context, what is required. It's not a constraint, it's not a limit, but it is really the basis on what we could expect others to respond to and reflect.
Okay, thank you for that. I intend to move on. Sorry, we've dealt with all the MMs, haven't we? Okay, let's move on to D2. Now, we had a long and lengthy discussion on the principles of development in Winchester in previous sessions. So this is the policy that really encapsulates all of this. And again, same point with regard to the preamble, which again, some of it is historic. The Winchester vision. That's historic.
I would say again, it's an issue the council has sort of been considered for some time. You've already heard from the City of Winchester Trust, there's been calls for a citywide master plan and the rest of it. I think where we are at the moment is what we want to do is actually focus our efforts in terms of detailed spatial planning, if you like, on those areas of change. So it's really about station approach. It's about CWR to the extent that needs refreshing. It's those specific opportunities. A lot of work's been done over the last few years with the city, the vision, the One Great Win, the Winchester Town Vision, and other initiatives. What we're trying to do is put in this plan, hence the length, but also the extent to which that is set out in this plan. We're trying to maximise the value we get from that work that's been done to date on a citywide basis. So there's where the opportunity area has been identified, other work from the town vision, all of that's been tried to brought in here. We've tried to be careful about the weight we give that and the requirements we set on developers, given it's not a full area action plan or anything close to it, but we're trying to maximise the value we've got through all those processes to set out what we can for the future of Winchester, including important elements like the movement strategy and the relatively recently adopted LC WIP. So that's the preamble, if you like. That's the justification for why that section's so long, frankly, is we're trying to maximise the value of what we've got or what we've done to leave us to focus on the main areas of change that you've already discussed in the allocations.
Okay. So let's look, and I've made my position clear that I'm not here to improve the plan. I'm only here to test that it's sound. It's your plan. Okay, so policy D2 then goes through in order to deliver the local plan vision, and you've explained that for Winchester Plan development proposals through the design process will need to demonstrate how they address the following. And the first were any aspects, characteristics, and specific design requirements that are relevant, identified in site allocation policies. Is that necessary? It's a policy in the plan, isn't it? Site allocation. The development of the master plan, which sets the design parameters, framework, and placemaking principles for developing. Just a query. Does it detract from soundness? Again, we're in this sort of territory.
I don't think it does one way or the other. I think, and this is an equivalent point for D3 and D4, isn't it? So we talk about allocations here. We just see if you're working through a checklist of what is expected to deliver, if you're bringing forward an application in Winchester or the South Hampshire urban areas or the Market Towns rural area, then obviously it's allocations policy first, and it's not it. On balance, we think it aids legibility and clarity to start. That's your starting point, and then you're looking at other factors, relevant factors identified in the subsequent criteria of this and D3 and D4.
Okay, get the point. And then you refer to principles set out in master plans, local area design statements, conservation area appraisals. Now, what do you say? Process will need to demonstrate how they address the following. So what's the status of those documents? I mean, you're not saying in accordance with, you're saying that they need to address the following.
Exactly. It's because they are a variety of different documents produced by different means, and frankly, in some cases of certain ages as well. But it would be helpful for someone bringing forward a planning application to record relevant documents that are in place and set out how they've responded to it.
Yeah, okay. And then we've got community engagement, apart from for householder.
Yes.
Now, do you give details on community engagement? What is expected? How community engagement has been used to inform and influence the outcome of the design process? Do we look to D1?
It's not a huge amount on the process of community engagement in D1 even. It's really set out in the statement of community involvement, how we imagine planning applications to be consulted upon. So I think that's where it is. We run the risk of overlaying and reviewing that in subsequent reviews of the SCI if we go there here.
Okay, is that clear?
We don't specify that. No.
Sorry?
We don't spell that out in the policy. No, we don't mention the SCI in here. That would be helpful, wouldn't it? I think actually, as a point of soundness for an applicant looking to make an application, if they know they just need to go to the SCI as a first point, that would be helpful.
Okay, yeah, hear what you say. And then we go on to how the distinct character of the local area has informed the proposal and will respond positively to it, reinforce it, etc. I don't have any comment on that unless you do.
No, thank you.
Yeah, and then we deal with roof design, which is very particular, given the topography, isn't it, and the heritage assets. And then we've got strategic connections, green space, delivery of transport improvements. Now, delivery of transport improvements in the Winchester Movement Strategy, Winchester Walking Strategy, City of Winchester local cycling and walking infrastructure, and other relevant transport documents that have been prepared and consulted on with the involved local community. Is that in accordance with government policy? Is it in accordance with the NPPF?
I think it's important for us to make clear that we're asking in this case, because I know we've had responses to this session on it, we're asking people to reflect on how they respond to it. So what we're saying is there's these documents have been prepared with a long list of major and quite minor schemes. And that it should actually be quite helpful if there's, say, schemes in the LC WIP that could play a part in your transport solution for your proposal, and refer to how you'll do that. I think the concern has been raised that people are required to deliver. They're not required to deliver anything. They're required to set out how they've responded to that list of potential schemes that are set out in those documents.
Okay, I get that. Don't need a response unless Mr. Hiccup, no. And then setting of the South Downs National Park, that's self-explanatory, and then the opportunities. Now that's the opportunity areas, is it? Listed opportunities within that area.
Yes.
Contribute to the identified opportunity areas and listed opportunities, and then it has in addition to specific comments, and then heritage assets impacts on SSSI and SACs, SACs, and then within the North Walls and the Broadway areas of opportunity, there may be potential development to reduce existing flood risk. Okay,
Yes.
so it's generally responding to those things.
Yes, I mean some of those detail points have arisen through follow the Reg 18 consultation, comments from Lead Local Flooding Authority,
Okay.
Natural England, and the rest of it. Just to outline here, there is a main modification proposed on this part of the plan and criteria 10. So it's main modification, forgive me, 13, which is to tweak that criteria 10, just to try to ensure that it's all about how you, it's about making sure that we don't focus on delivery. It's about responding to potential in those areas.
Okay, so it takes out the potential for the proposal to deliver or contribute to the listed opportunities. It says for development in identified opportunity areas, the following points should also be considered. Should be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Got that. Could I turn to those around the table, please, to comment on this? City of Winchester Trust, please, Mr. Beveridge.
Reference has been made to the trust, I think, but by the council just now about our long-held view that there should be a citywide plan developed. And there's reference to all these background documents that have been prepared, accumulated over the years, but they haven't very often led to actual progress in development on the ground, both in terms of sites being developed and also in terms of transport being managed in a progressive way. And it's our contention that a citywide plan would help to progress that. Clearly, the council takes the view that the way they've prepared it and set it out in the local plan here will do the job for everybody. We'd still take the view that that's not the case, and it's been proved really in terms of the lack of activity over the preceding years in either the sites being developed or the Winchester movement strategy being brought forward in any coherent way from the original 2019 document. I think the sites will be developed in due course, I've no doubt, but they need to be considered how they relate to one another and indeed how they impact on the historic core of Winchester, which has largely remained unaltered in terms of its street pattern since Roman and Anglo-Saxon times. I mean, there's an illustration in terms of the central Winchester regeneration area, which had its development agreement document approved by the council a month or two ago, in that they're having difficulty in how they manage the transport and movement outside the confines of the central area, and they still have to manage and get agreement as to how buses should move. Our view is that a spatial plan would expedite that and encourage something to actually happen in a more ordered and expeditious time.
Okay, so are you talking about something like an AAP or something like that?
Sorry, I didn't get the document.
Sorry, are you talking about something like an area action plan?
Yeah, that, yes. Or yes, there's area action plans for some things. We've rather veered away from the idea of a neighbourhood plan because they're very, very time consuming and take an awful long time. So an area action plan is certainly one possibility, and so is an SPD. Special.
We have already dealt with this issue. Council, quick response.
Yes, I think we've made our views very clear about, obviously, we don't think citywide planning is appropriate. The one thing I will say is obviously that the opportunity areas that are in the local plan, we did talk to the City of Winchester Trust about bringing forward basically a more detailed plan for basically an area, but unfortunately they didn't want to participate. So we did try basically to bring forward one, and that's the idea of those opportunity areas, that you can bring forward more detailed plans for them. But regrettably, those discussions didn't take forward with the City of Winchester Trust. So it's not the fact that we haven't tried, and there is the opportunity still there to do that, obviously to bring something forward. But obviously, regrettably, that hasn't happened.
So what you're talking? What
So
are you talking about bringing forward?
Well, but bringing forward basically more detail. So the opportunity areas are in the plan. So one of them is the Bar End Depot that you're probably familiar with. Basically, the Bar End Road basically is not the greatest entrance to a city of this calibre. It could be much more. So obviously there is the opportunity to bring forward a more detailed plan for that area and other areas in the city as well. So we're not closing the door on that. We're saying basically there is the opportunity. That's why those opportunity areas are there.
And you're thinking in terms of more detailed plans, SPD or something
They
like
could
that.
be an SPD. Obviously, we're waiting for the government to tell us about SPDs, the future role of the SPDs and what's going to happen, and design codes. So once there's more clarity there, there could be the opportunity to do it.
And is there a hook in the plan? Does it need a hook?
I think there is the hook because obviously there's D1 you could adopt it against quite easily. The opportunity areas are listed there very clearly with obviously the starting point for those kind of embryonic thoughts, if I can give them, from the design workshops. So there is the hook there to do some more work, but you do need willing partners to do it. And without those willing partners, unfortunately, we haven't got the resources to bring that forward.
Okay, just one more point that I want to pick up on is this point that I've raised on a number of occasions is about policy requirements in text. If you turn to 545, it is expected that new buildings should be of a scale which is sympathetic to others in the surrounding areas. 5.51, developers will be required as part of the design process to demonstrate how they have taken this information in order to influence the design of the development. I mean, those are translated into policy, but sorry, that's just a demonstration of what I'm referring to when I say, is there policy being brought forward in supporting text? Does anyone from the council have a comment on that?
I think the fundamental test is, does it set out some requirement which you don't subsequently see in policy? And I don't think any of the examples with respect which you pointed to really do that. We've been quite careful, I think, in the preparation of the plan to avoid that. And there have been it's no secret that one or two things where we changed the plan between Regulation 18 and Regulation 19 to precisely to avoid that kind of problem. So we don't think that there are any examples where there's some freestanding requirement that the developer wouldn't ordinarily and otherwise rather have to comply with, which is set out in policy.
Okay, so as I said, that's exactly what I'm referring to. So close reference in any one case to ensure that there's nothing within the supporting text that isn't then defined in policy. Any other queries on D2? Let's move on then. So D3 and these policies very much mirror that policy, don't they, in as much as so first of all, we're dealing with the South Hampshire urban area. Right, and tell me the rationale for this policy, because it's not absolutely a foregone conclusion, is it?
Yes, I mean, really, this one and to a slightly less extent D4 are companion pieces to D1 because it's considered helpful to have plan-wide coverage. D2 is really the one that adds a lot to the plan. But on balance, we thought it was helpful for applicants bringing forward proposals within the South Hampshire urban areas to have a brief statement, a short policy on what we're looking at. In effect, really, what we're looking at in the South Hampshire urban areas is they're told to go back and look at the overall master plans that inform those existing permissions for those sites. And that's really what you get from D2. Sorry, what you get from D3. We're conscious of the length of the plan, but we've left the policy D2. We've left the policies D3 and D4 in the plan, but we accept that, frankly, these bring less value to them. On balance, we think, well, at least then you're not spending time looking around. Is there anything I'm supposed to be looking at outside of Winchester town? Where do I go? At least this sets out what our expectations are. But there's nothing in there that isn't in D2. It's just a much shorter list.
Yeah, it's the first four, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's the aspects, characteristics and specific design requirements in site allocations. Then you've got all the other documents, etc.
Yes.
Then you've got 10 characteristics of the National Design Guide, and then you've got community engagement. So if, for example, I mean, these sites are still delivering, aren't they?
Yes.
And so the rationale for this policy is that they're still delivering, and should you get a new proposal through, it is
exactly as is the case with the additional capacity being looked at West of Waterlooville and North Whiteley. While speaking, I should just outline you asked about whether these areas should be defined on the policies map.
Oh, right.
In the plan. And in our response, we do say, well, actually, it's not an area as such. It's more the scale, the type of developments. These are cross-boundary, significant scale developments. So we did not see the need to put a distinct red line around them out on the policies map. And arguably, you could say that would have worked against us looking at the additional capacity at, say, Whiteley, where there's been small parcels of expanded. However, there is now a main modification 8, which is
for all of for the three areas.
Yes, for the South Hampshire urban areas.
Okay,
it's just to change the map on page 2 of the plan, and you see it in the document in front of you to set out the areas that are for identification purposes, rather than, if you like, a policies map.
And then would you have something in the policy that says, as referred to on the policies map?
That's not the modification you see in front of you at the moment. We don't think
necessary. Anyone to refer the policy to the policies map?
But forgive me if I can just,
Sorry.
while it's being considered, we're not proposing a change to the policies map. We're proposing a change to an inset map in the text of the plan,
Okay.
just so that you know where West Waterlooville, North Whiteley is, and
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one thing. So is this a map 2 of the local plan? Let's just have a look at that. What page is that on, please? Easy. Okay, so I raised that. I see. I see. So it's just adding. Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. I jumped in there. So the next point is, do these policies need to refer to the policies map? And I've heard what you've said. There isn't a proposal at the moment to identify them on the policies map. Are they effective in the absence of that?
if I may, I think they are, because if you look at the South Hampshire urban areas part of the plan, it's very clear what specific developments are included in them. It's not the South Hampshire part of Winchester district. It is those sites and allocations that have come forward because they have a cross boundary or even sub-regional significance. It's about some key sites in the southern part of our district that have their, if you like, their genesis in the Southampton planning in the South Hampshire context. So we haven't thought that it's needed to specify them on a map. We could put some text at the start of that South Hampshire and urban areas chapter, for instance, to say that this relates to the area identified in the map on page 2. But at the moment, we haven't had a problem to date with, in the adopted plan, with identifying, with a confusion or concern as to whether a site was inside or outside of the South Hampshire urban area, even if it was a development parcel coming forward in, say, Wickham or somewhere else that's quite close to a significant development near the boundary.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fox.
Thank you. Just to add to Mr. Ayling, I think if I could direct you to paragraph 13.2 on page 365, where we talk about page 365, and it's paragraph 13.2. So there, towards the bottom, basically we explain there about basically it's Newlands, West of Waterlooville, Welburn North, North Whiteley, and northern part of Wigston. So we are trying to set the scene there in terms of what we mean by obviously the South Hampshire urban areas, Mr. Ayling said.
Yeah. And
the same is obviously the same for the market towns and rural areas section. So they do need to be read across in terms of basically the policy.
Sorry, but I come back to this point. Does a policy need to refer to the policies map in order to be effective? I mean, it's a genuine question.
Well, I'm not sure it does, as long as there is a vehicle for identifying what is meant by South Hampshire urban area. I think we take the view that the combined materials that would be in front of the plan's user are such as to enable you to identify that.
And then if we translate that over to market towns and rural villages, that's okay.
No, I was going to talk to that before.
Sorry. That principle about the policies map, market towns and rural areas, those are all identified anyway, aren't they?
Yes, and if I may, they are shown clearer now following the proposed modification on that change to map on page 2.
Yeah.
So it shows Winchester town, it shows the South Hampshire urban areas, so that you have a rest of the plan area. So it's for identification purposes, it's clearer.
So what's market towns and rural area, including country?
It is, it's a black and white document, but on that page 2 is on the map on page 2, it's the area that isn't the darker grey you see. Forgive me, I'm referring to the modifications document that's passed around today. Yeah. And then the text in page 389 actually again lists where those areas are, but in effect it's everywhere outside of Winchester town, the South Hampshire urban area sites, and of course the national park.
Okay, so sorry, I just want to be very clear on this point. There's no necessity to refer to the policies map. This is your position. There's no necessity to refer to the policies map if there's another vehicle to enable identification.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Well, I put it another way, in the proper terminology, the plan does not become unsound because it's not referred, it doesn't directly say in the policy wording, read the policy map. That's the way we put it.
Okay, thank you for that. Can we move on to policy D4? Please, and this is design principles in market towns and rural areas, and it does exactly the same thing with an additional criteria, key priorities identified in the design workshop report on market towns and rural areas.
Yes, so the council went through a process in 2021, I think, as married to the design workshop process that had gone through, identified key issues of importance for communities in the market towns and rural area that rather than go to great detail in this, but we've highlighted the main ones that arose through that report. It feels like they're relevant and helpful for people bringing forward proposals in those or market towns, rural areas, communities. So that's why they're listed.
And what's the status of that document?
The status is it was a workshop that helped us basically craft this policy and led to the design review. Like I say, it was a void in the existing local plan that we didn't have guidance there, and people thought that it was really important that we kind of took the National Model Design Code a step further.
Okay, and is it clear? Will somebody reading this policy know where to go to get the design workshop report?
I think that's it forms part of the evidence base, and obviously it's referred to in paragraph 5.52 on page 83 in terms of basically what happened. And like I say, that was through the Design Southeast. We did those workshops. There's 3 different separate workshops we did, facilitated workshops, and they gave up some really useful information that we wanted to embed in the plan.
Design workshop report on market towns and rural areas, and 5.52 that isn't.
569. So
5.5.
5.60 page.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, are there any MMs you're suggesting on this policy? No, I don't think so. Okay. Okay, then it's now 3:15. Let's take a break. If we take a 20-minute break, we'll come back at 25 to 4. Thank you.
I think we need to also look at obviously the amendments. Amendments, if I may, to page 3 of what we circulated. If that makes sense. So basically, obviously, just talking you through. So obviously, top of page 99, changing the wording. But obviously, at the top of page 3 is probably the pertinent thing where we come forward for significant development, larger sites. Larger should be deleted. I think what we're trying to make it clear about when obviously this policy applies, and obviously it does apply to obviously significant development. The whole pretense from the concept master plan is basically that through the council's pre-app process, obviously that will help determine whether or not you need a concept master plan. We're certainly not saying, we've had a discussion, as you recall, on the market towns and rural areas. We're not saying concept master plans for those sites, etc., because often they're small sites, etc. So it is more complicated sites, and we've had good examples of that from Bushfield Camp to St John Moore Barracks, which obviously is quite complicated sites in themselves. So we're trying to be clear about when we want concept master plans, because the whole thing is concept master plan process needs to go to cabinet. So if we had basically we're asking for concept master plans for everything, we'd just literally be cabinet every week. We want to be proportional to when we actually need them and why we need them.
This amendment exactly.
That's right. That's the intention.
I understand. And then this the donor around table, this idea of concept master plan.
Yeah, certainly. We developed this. We went to cabinet basically to agree the process for how we agree a concept master plan and the issues that basically need to be addressed in the concept master plan. And actually, we helpfully kind of put it on page 97, 98, a diagram from that process kind of work that we need to go through, similar to the design process. But what we didn't do is kind of catch the wording up with that process. So that was the mission on our part to basically make sure that the two basically were in parallel. I think basically what we're trying to say is obviously, say for example, a University of Winchester or Peter Symonds College, etc., that they are major landowners. We do have a number of them in the district, and IBM obviously down the road. So obviously we're trying to capture them, that obviously that they need to go through this process because we think it's important. Basically, they do go through this process, and obviously there is 15 criteria, but we do think they are essential in terms of basically again setting out what the expectation is and what they need to include. That refers to the need for a concept master plan. So basically, obviously, we would encourage those larger developments to have that pre-app discussion with us early on, so that they can scope out the content of obviously not only the planning application, but also obviously whether or not it triggers the need for a concept master plan. And that's worked successfully with Bushfield Camp and Sir John Moore Barracks. Yes, again, that's just trying to be clear, basically, what they are, because, like I say, whilst there is a cabinet process and a cabinet paper that's been agreed about what they are, obviously just want to be clear about what they do contain. It's not, well, it's defined in paragraph 5.72, which basically says significant development of sites which have an impact on the community and may have potential to deliver benefits to the community through the development. So it's not necessarily, again, it goes on to because of the scale, but it may be a result of the impact on the local character of the place on which it's introduced. So we're trying to add a degree of flexibility there. And like I say, we are trying to basically narrow that down through our pre-application discussions with the applicant to say, is this or is this not something that triggers basically a concept master plan?
It's 5.72 in the proposed modification. Yeah.
It's on page 2 of the document, kind of whatever that is, third paragraph down. But it's not changing that wording that's already there. Yeah.
It's on page 1. On page 1.
It's we're looking at probably different documents here. It's on page 1 of the standalone sheet to the D5. Yeah. Yes. So what we're trying to do is basically change the text that's in paragraphs 5.70 to 5.72, and that basically defines basically what significant development is in basically 5.72. So we're trying to again make it clearer basically about what these are and kind of the process behind it. And like I say, that was a mission on our point when we drafted the plan. The concept master plan process was being agreed at cabinet. The plan hadn't really caught up with that change in direction. So what we're trying to do is rectify that and make it clearer in the plan, basically that obviously what is significant development, how should you deal with it and things like that.
Well, I think it's fair to say, Mark, that we identified, not least because of questions in some of the earlier sessions, that the use of the term master plan in this policy was slightly confusing. So therefore, we've kind of shifted stream to talk about concept master plans, which we think is a better expression of what's needed on these major sites. And obviously, they're all sites in respect of which there would obviously be pre-application discussions, extensive pre-application discussions, in which case any arguments about whether this was genuinely a site which needed a concept master plan would be bottomed out and decided at that point. Yes, that's why we've done it, because of the way that concerns had emerged. And within that context, as we've seen on a number of other occasions, it's impossible to put a precise definition as to what a significant development is in a numerical or even a qualitative way. And therefore, we've set out what we think is an appropriate definition, but it's always subject to the caveat that there's going to be extensive pre-application consultation, as I've said.
Yeah, it's not an SPD. It was basically, if you look at the bottom of paragraph 5.76, oh no, sorry, that's what I'm referring to. We do have a cabinet approval, don't we? What's that on 5.76? Yeah. To basically signpost you back to the cabinet agreement of what a concept master plan should be. And like I say, that you'll find that diagram that's on pages 97, 98 in that document, which clearly shows the process that you need to go through. Yeah, it's these are the only different so it should still be yeah.
If I may, can I just add in response to that comment, Mum? An original modification was put in to remove the requirement for applications to be preceded by, but now we are clarifying that this only applies to those few circumstances where a concept master plan is required rather than a master plan set out in the allocations. Then actually for those few where we're talking about a master plan that typically would go to cabinet, then in effect it should be a plan application should be preceded obviously to go to cabinet prior to going to planning committee. So that part of that modification that you've previously seen falls away and is superseded by the document that's been circulated today.
And the approval process for, okay, so that's for a large site, you say that what is the approval process?
Well, the approval process is through a cabinet decision, which is the process that Bushfield Campus and John Moore Barracks went through. And obviously, as part of that concept master plan, it comes back to similar to the design process, is documenting clearly what you did and why you ended up with that solution for that site. And like I say, that comes back to the diagram on page 97, 98 about it's a process that we want people to go through and document what they've done, how they resulted in it. And that's essential, basically, as part of this kind of transition we've got towards basically getting people to document more about the journey that they go on and the output. Yeah. No, it's basically a material planning consideration in obviously the planning balance. We've also made it very clear that obviously once you get approval for those concept master plans, there may well be further refinement that you do basically as a result of further work to basically work them up further. And basically that is quite acceptable to basically do further work on issues that still, need to be kind of at a granular level. In the cabinet report, that obviously that's the process that we've got, and in the guidance that we've got on the website, we've got guidance document on the website basically about it, which is similar to, obviously it takes you through basically the diagram on page 97, 98. That's it. Yeah. It's in that document in the cabinet approval. So we see the two policies obviously being read together, because obviously one provides you with more information on that, whereas obviously a site allocation would say a master plan, and obviously this provides you more detail on the process that needs to be followed.
Thank you, Ma'am. Yes, we acknowledge that some of the modifications put forward by the council this morning actually do cover some of the points we made in our representations. I think there's one point that we're not so sure on, and there's still a concern there, which is the last point you made then, which is how D5 policy as now amended sits with some of the site allocation policies. In terms of our site, which is, as Mr. Fox said, is Bushfield Camp, we've gone through the concept master plan process and we've been approved at Cabinet. But what I still don't think is clear in D5 is whether or not this policy actually does relate to site allocations where there's quite a lot of detail, for instance, in the Bushfield Camp policy about the requirements of a master plan.
Sorry,
about the requirements of a master plan. So there seems to be there's a detailed policy in D5, but also there's site-specific master plan principles and requirements within our allocation as well. And the worry here is that we've got a repetition of policies where there's two policies that apply to the same site in our case in terms of Bushfield Camp, where the requirements are quite some detail in W5 for us. So I mean and
we haven't looked at that policy yet.
No, we haven't looked at that policy yet. But if you look at the first, the replacement paragraph at 570, which was on page 1 of the document that was sent out this morning, it says site allocations in this plan identify where a master plan is required to support planning applications and indicate the scope of what is required. So that's effectively, I think, not much different than what D5 is trying to do. So do we need two policies that cover very similar points is our concern, really, because we've got a bespoke policy on W5 which sets out what our master plan needs to cover. It's whether or not there's repetition there and whether or not that impacts on the effectiveness of the policy.
What page is I've got it. Okay, I hear that point. Could I turn to Sport Winchester, please?
Yeah, this is not a very technical point, so I know this is probably something but having spoken with most of the developers on the sites, all the proposed sites that are coming forward, and been engaged in the master plan, the concept plan, whatever it's called, there's something that I think that is fundamentally flawed in the process, which is very difficult to get around, which is often I've heard a lot of the commentary, which is, don't worry, this is just a concept plan. When we get to the next stage, it will change, it will change, it will change. There's very little evidence to show that actually happens. And what I say that there's something, I don't know whether it was what is the definition of a concept plan versus a master plan? Where does it fit in the process? But the process itself, it's very difficult for independent stakeholders to understand where to insert themselves in what is often a legal or a professional process to influence and input into the master plan over and above what are quite superficial consultation processes that happen. It's very opaque, is all I'd say. So it's more an observation from an external stakeholder group, is that what we're not trying to do is say the process is broken or that the professional and legal process needs to happen. But certainly there's been a very strong history in this area for things to come forward that either don't happen, so they never actually get to fruition and happen, or every party in the process, whether it's the independent stakeholders or whether it be developers dropping a load of money to go nowhere, there seems to be something fundamentally that could be improved in the process, whether it's design, whether it's being definitions of concept planning. And I don't know whether that's something that needs to be in the local plan thing, or whether it's sound or unsound, all these definitions. But there is something that is not getting to an optimum endpoint for everybody. whether the endpoint just never happens because you're stuck in a process. And so that's just an observation rather than anything else. It's quite opaque, it's quite difficult, and it's not easy. And when I can understand that everybody is in a slightly difficult place, and the only reason I say that, the evidence base is having informal conversations with a number of the key players. Everybody is frustrated, but everyone's still living within the constraints of a process that is maybe not fit, it's never going to be perfect, but how could that process be improved to get better outcomes? And it's unclear to me how tangibly the local plan process is going to get us to better outcomes. There are words about design thinking and better design and things like that and all these things, but if you're Bushfield Camp and you're a church commissioner and you're a developer, you want to get a plan away quickly. They are open to ideas, but the language that wraps around it is quite alienating in terms of, I'll speak to, these guys and they say, well, it's just a concept plan. At what point does it become concept? Does it become deliverable? So I'll shut up now, but it's just an observation that what seems from a technical, scientific, expert point of view, a robust process actually doesn't necessarily deliver what's needed and it's not easy. I would say it's not easy, but so I'm trying to articulate a point very badly. It's not a criticism of the plan, but it's impenetrable and it doesn't end up with good outcomes. If that's what the objective of a local plan is to end up with really good outcomes. That was my point.
Do the council wish to respond to that? It's something that I've heard many times.
It's a sort of broader process point, I think, rather than specific.
Of course.
Plan.
Do you wish to respond at all? I'm happy for you to.
The only thing I will say is obviously, please don't judge the concept master plan is quite a new concept that's come in to address those issues that basically the gentleman has quite identified. So it is a new concept that basically the City Council is keen to basically bring forward through the cabinet process. I think it has worked well for both Bushfield Camp and John Moore Barracks. Obviously yet to see kind of development on the ground as that, but that's not through lack of willing from the partners around the table. But I think obviously what we're trying to do is include that process. Before we haven't got that process, that's a new concept that's come in basically in the last year, 14 months, etc. So I wouldn't like to be judged on basically failing because basically it is a new process. We're trying to be more open and transparent and obviously get people to demonstrate to Cabinet what they've done. And I think having that public scrutiny at the Cabinet meeting, basically with the developers and whatever, to say, what have you done? How have you reached that decision? It's got to be a good thing in advance of basically planning committee having the application, which obviously is historically what we did was they brought forward a master plan at planning committee. So they've had more closer scrutiny by having that open Cabinet meeting where basically people can register to speak and obviously, ask them telling questions.
Mark, can I
just very
sorry?
I was at some point. It doesn't have to be now to interrupt the flow, but I'd like to just respond on the point that Litchfield's raised.
No, absolutely. I was just going. Could I ask, please, for this discussion to continue outside? It's a broader point. It's a very important point, and it's very good for us as an industry to listen to that. So thank you very much. But could I ask for that discussion to continue between the council and Sport Winchester outside this room? Could I ask, please, now that this point about repetition and how D5 would relate, and we'll use Bushfield Camp. We haven't scrutinised that policy yet, but clearly it's there in criteria 3, a master plan is required. How will the two work together, please? D6 and any of the site allocation, but take that one as an example.
I mean, I think the essential point is that D5, one looks at the requirements in D5, they provide a series of things which effectively every good development should have, and which every good development would reflect in the concept master plan that comes forward. When you descend a slightly lower level to individual sites, which may have individual characteristics, individual constraints, individual things that have to be responded to by design, that there may well be a case for specifying in those policies, it's not done in all, but specifying in those allocation policies some particular elements. And if there is a degree of repetition in terms of some of the overall points, then in a sense, so be it. Doesn't cease to make the process envisaged by D5 effective, doesn't cease to make the descent to detail that you see in the allocations.
What if there's
effective.
any conflict?
Well, if there's any conflict, then as there's sometimes easy in local plan policies, they do sometimes pull in different directions.
Yeah.
That's an accepted feature. I mean, clearly the plan, the one which descends to detail is likely to be more relevant if there is any pulling in opposite directions. I mean, in reality, because of the nature of the stipulations in D5, I suspect it's pretty unlikely that there would be conflict. But if there were to be, then the more detailed requirements would presumably have greater weight.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to add anything more? Litchfield, do you wish to?
No, I understand what the council's saying. I think it just needs to be, for instance, there are paragraphs in both policies that are almost identical in terms of things like high quality, high standard of architectural design, obviously transport assessment, sustainable modes of transport and things like that, which just seems slightly unnecessary to have two policies that are very similar. I mean, the other point I think is that if the council's aim is that this applies to all allocations where there's a master plan that's required within the policy, I think it needs to be clear in the policy, because I don't think it is at the moment.
Sorry,
I'm saying it's not
clear.
Well, no, clear in D5 that it applies to all site allocations where there's a master plan, because it's not clear at the moment. The point for us is, and our points is that we've got quite a detailed allocation that requires a number of points there as part of the detailed design of the scheme, which are replicated in D5. What D5 doesn't do at the moment is actually say that that policy applies to all allocations, which requires a master plan as set out in the individual allocation. So to me, it's just not clear between the two. I think there's still repetition there, is probably unnecessary, but it's more a case of making it clear. I think that if that's what the council want to do, and you think that's acceptable and appropriate, is that the D5 would apply to all allocations where a master plan is required as set out within the plan.
Can the council respond to that point, please? And would this policy relate to all site allocations?
No is the answer. It wouldn't relate to all site allocations.
Right.
That's the critical thing that we're trying to get across.
Yeah, quite.
It does,
because this is about concept master plans.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think,
okay.
And the other point is, I think, if it's said that there's unacceptable repetition, that's probably a criticism to be directed at the site allocation policy rather than the general policy, which is a broader application and needs to be there so it can be of broader application.
Okay, so we've said, yeah, okay, take that point. So this policy sets out when a concept master plan is required. Site allocations, quite a lot of them ask for a master plan. They don't ask for a concept master plan. Is that translated into the site allocations, that requirement for a concept master plan? Does it need to be specifically spelt out which site allocation would be subject to a concept master plan?
I think that obviously what we're not intending to do is obviously a lot of the market town ones, if you recall, had the word master plan.
Exactly.
We're not intending, obviously, for the vast majority of those to come forward with a concept master plan. It'd be far too onerous for the scale and quantity of the site.
Yeah.
In terms of obviously which other sites could be eligible for a concept master plan, that is through the pre-application process. And for example, there may be key sites which will come on to former leisure centre at River Park. That may or may not be appropriate for a concept master plan. But I don't think it'd be helpful for the plan to actually specify that at this stage, because those discussions haven't yet to take place. So we want to allow that degree of flexibility through the pre-app discussion to determine whether or not something is eligible for a concept master plan.
Okay. Parish Council, please, Littleton and Hairstock.
Thank you, ma'am. Our parish council has no problem with the concept master plan as a planning tool, but is much more concerned with how the process surrounding it is being applied. And I hear what's just been said, that it's a policy which is still in its early days of development. So perhaps how it's being applied is even more salient in terms of the policy being effective. We seem to have arrived at a strange situation where the concept master plan process has been undertaken. It was approved in Cabinet in February this year, a few months before the relevant policies applying to that site are being examined in this setting over these few weeks. So we could end up with a situation where there's potentially a conflict between what's been approved as a concept master plan and what may come out at the end of it and becomes the adopted local plan. So it seems to be a clear case to us that the cart has been put before the horse. And I think part of the sort of embedded within that is that as far as the Sir John Moore Barracks site's concerned, the concept master plan is trying to do two things at once. It's trying to come forward with a design for a development scheme of the site, and at the same time it was being asked to actually come up with some planning policies, for example, defining the settlement gap. And I think in trying to straddle both strands there is partly some of the problem. So it's confusing, and I think it would be much clearer for us, for anybody from the outside, if all the material considerations and constraints which impact on that site are set out at the start before a concept master plan is then drawn up, having to take in all those constraints as part of the framework. It seems to us would be a clearer way forward. And then that kind of leads on to what is the status of this concept master plan. So in February it was deemed to be a material consideration, but within the master plan are other material considerations. So you've suggests that there's different layers of material considerations, and it's very unclear how they relate to each other, how they weighed up, balanced, in whatever way. So it just feels very difficult. If you're someone from the outside looking in, it seems unclear as to how you can decipher how an outcome or a decision is being arrived at clearly. And in that sense, one questions how effective it is, even if the intent behind it may be, fine, but the process seems to let it down at the end of the day.
Okay.
As far as this site is concerned, please.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to Defence Infrastructure Organisation.
Yeah, thank you, Mom. Rob Gardner from Avison Young on behalf of the DIO. I've got some observations from a party that's been through the process, and so I can give you some feedback on how it's been and how it's working. First of all, the point about there being two sources of guidance or policy, if you like, one from D5 and one from the specific policy that relates to one site. Take that point on board, and what we ended up doing was a consolidated list. We basically prepared a consolidated spreadsheet, which, to put it crudely, had all the boxes on it that we needed to tick. So we got them all from the two different sources. We actually added the other policies in the development plan as well, the emerging development plan as well, and made sure, whilst going through the process, that we had addressed all those points to the level that we felt appropriate. And we shared that process, we shared that exercise with the council as we went through.
Was there much repetition?
There was some, but nothing that I would say was harmful or conflicting.
Okay.
It's a positive process. Secondly, this is another observation. It did get everybody thinking about technical points possibly much earlier than they might otherwise have been, because if a document is going to be put in front of members and they're going to consider it, and I'll use the term loosely, it focuses everybody's minds on addressing those technical points. My third observation is around consultation. I think both us and Bushfield Camp have engaged specialist PR and engagement consultants on both those sites, and that was a decision we took largely because we appreciated the sort of magnitude and the seriousness attached to the engagement and consultation task that the council was, the brief that had been set to us. So we took that, duly seriously. And there have been numerous rounds of consultation taking place, numerous events, all long ahead of a planning application, far ahead of a planning application. So I think as a takeaway, that's been very positive. Now, what people feel about the outcome of that and what the master plan has ended up looking like is another matter, and I'm afraid that's town planning for us. But I think that the consultation exercise has been transparent and robust, and it means that the outline application, or the application when it comes, should not land cold. It should be development of a theme that the local population the local people are aware of. And then the final point, I think, relates to the status of it. I mean, we as a party have been sort of a little bit perhaps confused about the status of it as we've gone through. But it's pretty clear to me now that that's for the outline application. It's for the local planning authority to give weight to that at the outline application stage. So I don't think anybody can take anything away at this stage, meaningful away, to say the status of this or the weighting this will be given in a planning application will be X, Y, or Z. It's part of the planning balance exercise that will take place at the outline stage, and in my opinion, it in no way prejudices that planning balance exercise for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, can I turn to the council, please? You've heard comments from the parish council, and any observations from the DIO?
Yeah, well, I think obviously picking up on the parish council point, obviously what the DII said, I think it does bring early engagement in an open public forum, and that's the whole idea of the concept master plan, is to bring it to cabinet and to basically have that debate. And like I say, cabinet meetings are open for people to speak for and against, and I think having that public forum is welcome, surely, because basically that's what we as planners want to do, is have that debate. And for a concept master plan to come to cabinet, it's only going to come to cabinet if we as officers feel that it is robust and has gone through the process. And we have had discussions with people basically saying, well, you're not quite ready yet. You need to do a bit more work, because for us as officers to be comfortable to put it before our members, and obviously using it as a briefing before members as well. So I think that process is very clear in terms of what we're going to do. And obviously, like I say, we are breaking new territory. I don't mind admitting that, but hopefully we're moving in the right direction by including this process there. But I think it's a positive approach that we're taking towards it. The document on the website, basically, if you look at concept master plans on the website, very clearly says what step is, what happens, who should be involved, the action involvement, and the timeline for the notes. There's very clear guidance on basically what needs to be done. And obviously, like I say, it is encouraging from DOI that they went through the process, and Bushfield Camp as well, and basically set that out in a clear and transparent way.
Okay, thank you for that. I thought you were going to speak.
I think I will say this. I mean, just addressing the point that was made about the relationship between the concept master plan and the planning application. Obviously, the concept master plan would reflect a great deal of work and thought as to what was appropriate. And if something came along in the planning application which was radically different, then that planning application would then be assessed against the body of work that had been done that led to the concept master plan. Now, there might be some good reason why it had changed radically, and that could be justified. But equally, it would probably, it would have to demonstrate the good reason for changing from the concept master plan. And that's really where, as a material planning consideration, looking at it from a sort of legal perspective and a promoter's perspective, that's where the master plan would come in and have its relevance to the ultimate decision.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on. Thank you, everyone, for that. Let's move on to I was just checking I'd covered everything I wanted to. Let's move on to D6. This is the policy that deals with brownfield development and making the best use of land, and we touched on this earlier. No, I hadn't quite finished. I'm so sorry. The matter about management plans. Sorry, I did want to pick up on that. The requirement, sorry, for management plans and when they should be produced. Is that overly onerous? A management plan must be produced as part of the master planning process to demonstrate how infrastructure and community assets will be maintained and managed.
Thank
What's
you.
your comment on that?
Yeah, we have had a discussion on this, and I must admit the intent was there to basically say about other areas of land and how it basically could be managed. So if I use the example of Bushfield Camp, the other area that's not being developed, etc., and things like that, and obviously Sir John Moore Barracks with obviously the other areas, but actually we haven't really had much information, and that will probably come in more detail with basically a planning application. But at the concept master plan, some of those proposals might not be worked up. So exactly. we do appreciate that point, that obviously it may be onerous, but we thought it was a good idea in terms of basically setting down the marker that we don't want that important thing forgotten.
Okay, so are you suggesting any change in light of what you've said?
I think obviously, I think it could be deleted without basically going as out of the plan, and it wouldn't take away from the policy.
Okay, and are you going to put that in your schedule? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Parish Council.
Just on this point, I think it would be helpful if there was some indication of how certain open lands or conservation areas were going to be managed, even if it's just at a fairly high level, a matter of level of principle in terms of governance and potential funding, etc. So, just to illustrate, is it going to be outsourced? Would it be a private company or a newly created public interest company or some other stakeholder forum, but some indication for the community to know how it's envisaged to be taken forward rather than being left late in the day in a section 106 agreement or something like that. So I don't think it would be unduly onerous just to have a couple of paragraphs, if you like, just setting principles out.
Okay, thank you. So to be meaningful, is it something that would be dealt with at outline or probably reserved matter stage?
I think that's the issue, is obviously our the concept master plan was, we can put some paragraphs together, or an applicant could put some paragraphs together. How meaningful is that, and would you actually have that information? You're more likely to have that at the planning application stage. So I do appreciate Liston's point, but in terms of actually meaningful information, I do worry.
Okay, and just one additional point, there's another suggested in relation to criteria 12. Oh, I see. That's to refer
just green and blue infrastructure, just to be complete
and consistent with other
other policies.
Yeah, okay, I get that. Any comment on that? Okay, sorry, now let's move on to D6. And this is the policy that deals, which we touched on before, brownfield development and making the best use of land. Okay, does somebody want to introduce this policy?
Yes, if I may. So this is really setting out really the principle on which the development strategy of the plan has been based. So there's first of all there's the way in which the allocations in the plan have been derived. So that's really where we've, through the production of the plan, we have prioritised brownfield land in appropriate locations. Going forward, the plan talks about prioritising brownfield land, and I know there's questions about the relationship between this policy and, for instance, H2, which phases greenfield, proposes phase greenfield sites later on in the plan period, unless we have an issue with our supply of sites. I guess I would only just in a minor sense also supplement that with policy H6, which has a reduced requirement for affordable housing on brownfield sites to ensure they come forward. So there's an action the council's doing there to ensure that brownfield sites come forward, and that price signal, if you like, is sent through to all parties early. And then there are, you could say, measures in the economy chapter. They're listed in the statement where we consider the potential for reuse of buildings in the outside of settlement boundaries and that sort of thing to prioritise brownfield land. But that's the approach that the plan has taken with those, when read together with those other policies I've outlined.
So, and the reuse of brownfield land, obviously in accordance with the plan's strategy and national policy. You've got a suggested amendment.
Forgive me, it is marked as MM15 in the schedule. Apologies, that's a typing error. That supported text actually relates to policy D7. So it's the right modification, but it's against the wrong policy. Sorry, we'll correct that in later versions of this document.
Okay, and it's been raised by parties how brownfield sites outside settlement boundaries are going to be dealt with. What do you say to that? I mean, I know what you say, but
certainly in terms of housing, we've talked about the need to consider sites outside settlement boundaries and potential for sprawl and intensification.
Yeah.
And what that comes to, we think we have got a slightly more nuanced approach to existing employment sites elsewhere. We'll get onto that obviously later on in this examination, but we do think there is a more nuanced approach with regards to existing businesses and existing commercial buildings in the rural area, which we think is appropriate.
Yeah. And E7. Okay. Is there anything else that anyone wishes to say on this policy, please? Heritage Property, Mr. Heron.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mum. Mum, I think when you look at this policy, and particularly when you look at it in combination with policy SP3, it is a significant departure from paragraph 89 of the NPPF in the fact that it does impose a restriction that is well beyond that guidance. That guidance is very clear in its wording that planning policies should look to meet the requirements of local businesses and communities beyond settlement boundaries on brownfield sites.
Sorry, I'm just turning that up.
And then when you read this and then you read the restrictions, particularly around the exceptions in SP3, and I know we've discussed that before, but you do need to read these two policies together to see how a brownfield site outside of a settlement boundary is considered, actually these policies combine effectively to say, unless they are for the very specific purposes of operational needs in the countryside, a brownfield site outside the settlement boundary would not be appropriate development, and that is entirely contrary to paragraph 89 of the NPPF.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
We think, we think that paragraph 89 is really about ensuring that local business needs and and community needs, in fact, in rural areas are enabled, can come forward, recognising that there aren't always sites in existing settlements. When we think of our employment option, and we'll come to that again, but the policy in E9 does not actually require sites to be focused on brownfield sites. It just talks about acceptable sites, of which brownfield will clearly be a positive in considering them. But actually, if you can demonstrate a local need for local businesses to grow, or a new site in that locality, then a case is there to be made, and that opportunity is not restricted to brownfield sites. So we feel that we've gone there further, if you like, than that. We don't think we need to have an additional layer of prioritising potential brownfield sites in this policy to help that happen. I know we're sort of conflating going on to other matters, and yet we do think that actually this plan does have that new emphasis on local need, generating additional employment growth in outside of existing settlements and existing allocations. The emphasis is about, encouraging previously developed land and sites that are physically well related to existing settlements. We think we're there already, and what we don't see is a need for a presumption, if you like, of development of all brownfield sites for these purposes in the rural area. There are policies, however, around expansion of existing uses, how we deal with existing commercial floor space in PDL in the rural areas that do deal with that and provide an opportunity. But that's probably too much on the employment chapter of the plan. But that's where we think we are.
Okay. Mr. Heron.
Thank you. And listening to that, I understand those points, but that isn't actually what the NPPF says it is requirements. It does specifically relate to the requirement to make a specific.
I'm sorry, Mr. Heron, could you speak up?
Sorry, I understand those points, but actually that is the NPPF does make a specific reference to brownfield sites and the requirement to prioritise those, and including to do that. So I will read the paragraph of the sentence in it.
What paragraph are you referring to?
It's paragraph 89, and it's the last sentence of paragraph 89, and it says the use of previously developed land and sites that are physically well connected and related to existing settlements should be encouraged where suitable opportunities exist. But actually, when you have here two combinations of policies that actually prevent that. And again, I don't like to come back to the fact of the policy we've already discussed, but when we're discussing a policy around brownfield development, but you already have a prescriptive policy that does not make allowances for business needs adjacent settlements, because let's be clear, SP3 is very specific about operational need to be in the countryside, not the fact that it is a business that needs to expand in there for the need of the development space. You actually have two policies that are entirely contrary to what the government have required.
Okay.
I accept that the blanket, if you like, approach in SP3 is for development has an operational need in the countryside, but as we've sort of gone through, you've seen in participant statements and we've covered in other areas, there are a number of ways in which the plan recognises the potential and need for other types of development on PDL to come forward in the rural area in response to local needs or indeed reuse of existing buildings. So that's where we how we've come to our position here.
Okay, I understand. I understand both perspectives. And no MM suggested on that policy? No, okay. Thank you. Let's move on then. Development standards. So this policy is mainly addressing pollution and noise, isn't it?
Yes, and if I may, I'll introduce some modifications to this. So this is MM15 should correctly be referred to this policy. So it's deletion of paragraph 5.84 in the supporting text, which on reflection is repetition of paragraph 5.80. So we suggest that should be moved. I also wanted to highlight it's in our list of minor modifications that you still have, but it's PM213 for this policy. But what it is suggesting is, and it's a drafting error in this version of the plan, but on policy D7, the end of the section on pollution. So as you come down to the second column on page 104, forgive me, there's a it's criterion, what looks like part of criterion 6 here. Forgive me, I'm not actually at the bottom of the first column, I realise. So that criterion 6 should just read construction phase pollution impacts for large or prolonged developments, a full stop. And then what follows isn't part of criterion 6. It is in fact a new paragraph which starts the report should identify. What it's supposed to be doing is clarifying what is required in a report to outline pollution impacts. But because it's been mistakenly included in criterion 6, it reads as if it's part of that criterion and is only about construction phase pollution, which is not correct. So that at the moment is a proposed minor modification to just in effect insert a new line and ensure it is its own paragraph following that list of criterion 1 to 6.
Yes, okay. That answers one of my queries. Okay, does anybody have any comment on this policy, please? I don't either. Okay, let's move on to D8. And this deals with contaminated land. Really, the query is, are the requirements at application stage and post-approval clear? I.e., is there scope for the use of conditions, which is quite often the case with contaminated land? Could I just put that to the council, please?
Yes, so we've read the point raised, and in discussion with colleagues, we are proposing a modification here to make it clear what we would expect as part of the initial planning application, and then what could follow under further work secured by planning condition. And that, give me, I'm just calling up the number now. Yeah, so it's main modification 89 on the document. Yes, so this is in discussion obviously with environmental protection colleagues. So very much we do accept further work on this on contaminated land to follow, but it's important at the time that a plan application is determined that we know enough about the location and the potential impact of contamination insofar as it could impact on the layout of a scheme.
Okay, and then what are you suggesting here? Where appropriate, additional necessary information will be secured through planning condition, but it is essential that planning applications are supported by sufficiently robust and detailed information to enable a decision to be made on the principle of the development. That's the key thing, isn't it? So you get the principle sorted out at the application stage, and then you can condition.
Yes, it will be, for instance, that the nature of how the presence of contamination could be dealt with, you know. But if you're reliant on a landscaping screen to make a development acceptable, then for instance, you need to know that you can actually deliver a landscaping screen on that part of the site. We just need enough to know that type and disposition of uses.
Okay. Does anybody wish to make a comment on this? Okay. Thank you. And can we deal with shop fronts and signage? Now, these are policies D9 and D10. D9 deals with shop fronts and sets out requirements for shop fronts. D10 deals with signage. Now, they refer to these in relation. I don't have any queries on shop fronts. Is there anything that you want to raise, or does anybody else want to raise anything? Okay. In respect of signage, you refer to the council's design guidance for control of shops and signs. What's the status of that document? Design guidance for the control of shop fronts and signs. You refer to it in 5.97.
Apologies, we're just double checking whether or not it's an SPD. So just bear with us.
Okay. The related point is that, well, that's probably quite. Oh, are you there, Mr. Ayling? No, don't worry. And the next point is that the policy says, in order to maintain commercial visual attractiveness, consent will be granted for advertisements and signs which respect character and significance locally and conform to the guidance below, and City Council's design guidance for the control of shops and signs. So does that have to, should that wording be amended to ensure that you're not giving development plan status to something that shouldn't have it, i.e. the design guidance for the control of shop fronts and signs?
Yeah.
That's also said in
Yeah.
Advanced warning signs will be permitted only where they conform to the City Council's design guidance. So that's paragraphs 5.98.
Right.
I think the same in 5.97.
Yeah. I think obviously it's quite an old SPD. It isn't actually an SPD. I understand our colleagues in Heritage are actually currently updating it at the moment. I think it's a similar, looking at the policy D10 actually in hindsight, I think it's probably a similar issue to where we referred to the CWR SPD. I think if you recall, it says have regard to. So I think if you could leave that with us, Ma'am, I think we'll have a look at the wording of D10. I think it does need a main modification to basically clarify that point. But obviously it is a key issue in which our heritage team have worked very hard.
Oh, absolutely.
You see,
not questioning that.
no, it's just basically, I think it would help with the clarification.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's appropriate reference to non-tested documents, really, isn't it?
I think it's not raising the status beyond the development plan, which is the same issue with CWR.
And then premises, sorry, I'm looking at paragraph 5.97. Premises trading on the main streets will therefore not be permitted to display advance warning signs, A boards, where blah de blah. Where permitted, advance warning signs will be limited to one blah de blah. Is that in policy? Can you please check that?
Yeah, we will check that, Ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing it to our attention. I think it's a legacy from the previous local plan.
Okay.
So we'll check that.
Check that policy.
Yep.
Check that policy, please. Ensure that there aren't any requirements in the supporting text that aren't, or any contradictions in that policy. Does anybody wish to raise anything else with regard to those policies, D10 and D9? Now, the fact that I haven't had many questions on them doesn't indicate that that they're of less importance or anything like that. It just means that I've had enough from the written material that I've gone through, and I don't need to spend much time on them. Okay, is there anything else that we need to address? Okay, and we're back in again on Friday, aren't we, at 10 o'clock, and it's in the room. Okay, and I'll send agendas out before those sessions so that you can review them. Okay, just left to me to thank everybody for your contributions today and for your time, most helpful to me. It's now 5:15 and this hearing session is now closed. Thank you very much, everyone.